Hello, my name is Carol May Whittick. Welcome to Her Conversations, Tools for the Awakening. Her is an acronym for Higher Energetic Resonance. This is the optimal state to embody in order to attract our highest desires. What is the awakening? This is the moment in time when humanity rises up out of the darkness. Who is awakening? Each one of us present on Earth today, reclaiming our sovereignty, seeking greater possibilities in our reality and looking for solutions. We know being awakened is not a lofty ideal but a necessity. If we can transform ourselves, we can change the world. Guests on Her Conversations speak to your spirituality, sensuality and soul. Listen to their stories and hear how they are in service to the world. Let their words in these conversations embolden and inspire you. My guest on this week's Her Conversations is Suzanne Ko, who specialises in pelvic floor health, is a pre-postnatal coach and owner of SKo-Fit. Suzanne recently shared a personal story on social media about separating from her family, and unsurprisingly, this attracted a wealth of reactions, both supportive and vitriolic, which she says is an indication of the healing needed by so many in society. During our conversation, we also discuss the blatant attack on family morality and also her work with pre- and postnatal women. So as always, I ask my guests, Her is an acronym for Higher Energetic Resonance. When do you feel you're most her?
When I'm at peace. Peace with myself or being present, and brings me a sense of calmness in handling situations or being able to just pause versus reacting before I respond.
Amazing, thank you. And before we get into the main conversation, Suzanne, can you just introduce yourself to everyone who's listening? Just tell us a little bit about who you are and maybe even how we connected. Up to you.
Sure. So my name is Suzanne. My history actually came from a variety of backgrounds. So my degree is in architecture. I have a bachelor in architecture from Illinois Institute of Technology, and I went down through this path thinking that this is what I wanted to do as a career until the 2008 crash happened, and it shifted my sense of reality. It affected our markets, our housing markets. So I made a pivot and decided to pursue my passion for fitness. I was a part-time group fitness instructor while working in architecture full-time, and I decided to pursue a career in fitness, wanting to help people to. This is very ironic because I worked in an environment where we were sitting at our desk for 8 to 10 hours a day, not moving and not feeling very healthy. And so I decided to become a certified personal trainer to help my clients who were in these similar corporate environments where I was in, helping them to lead healthier lives. And then I also got certified as a yoga teacher in Shivananda yoga, which is a very similar type of yoga to hatha yoga. So I spent my career from 2009, 2010, all the way until 2016, when I had the birth of my first child. It was not the ideal birth that I had envisioned, and it turned out to be very traumatic, almost turned into an emergency situation. And I made another pivot in my career where I focused on helping women that went through very similar situations. I found out that I had pelvic organ prolapse of the bladder. So I sought out continuing education in pelvic health and working with pregnant and postpartum women. And that's where I shifted my career into helping that population. And then 2020 came around when everything changed again. I found that the community that I built on Instagram from 2010 all the way up until that point for a whole decade, I felt that it almost felt like a lie, because a lot of people that I had as followers were no longer in line with my own values. And so when I started speaking out about what was really happening, I was heavily censored and shadow banned. And so I found myself pivoting again because the population I was serving, or at least the colleagues that I was working with or I looked up to, were no longer in line with my values in terms of helping women. And I felt another shift happen. So in 2021, I started over with a brand new Instagram account, starting over, trying to finally find my own voice, which I felt like I never had my own voice. I had people reaching out to me, thanking me for sharing my story, because I think a lot of people felt like they were in the minority for wanting to speak out about what was really going on. And it gave people more of a purpose to find me on my brand new account, to hear things that they were going through that maybe they were afraid to talk about. And then that's how I met Carol, when I told my story about what happened with my family. So at the end of 2022, right before Christmas, I had a little blowout with my family, and it was basically the straw that broke the camel's back. And I decided to cut ties. It's a long history, and a lot of people may not understand that I went through a lot of trial and error and trying to help establish boundaries with my family, and they resisted all of my attempts to establish boundaries. So I finally decided to break ties for the health of myself, but also to show my children how healthy boundaries should be, and that they should be able to know how to consent and be able to stand up for themselves if they feel that they are not treated in a very respectful manner. So I shared my story in a video that now has gone viral. I shared it at the beginning of January. Now it's probably hitting close to over 400 views. And it's been eye-opening, because a lot of people that commented, they thanked me because the story resonated with them. They went through a very similar situation. I actually had a few people that commented who are Asian, and they said this is very typical in Asian culture, where if somebody makes a mistake, they don't apologize for it. They just move on, and hopefully it just goes away. And this is how my life has been throughout my entire childhood, where my parents, particularly my father, will make a mistake, be in the wrong, not apologize. And that was part of what set off this whole chain of events, when he wasn't apologizing to my 5-year-old at the time. I think a lot of people resonated with that, because in Asian cultures, it was frowned upon to speak up or to voice your opinion or to express any emotions. And there's a lot of trauma built into that, because you don't have that voice. And so it wasn't until I stood up for my daughter to my dad, I finally found that I have a voice. And I think that's very important. And so I think right now, I am not only helping women through pregnancy and postpartum, I'm helping families, especially parents, heal years of generational trauma. Becoming a parent has really taught me what I didn't understand as a child. And it wasn't until I became a parent that I realized that there needs to be a letting go of the ego when you're a parent. It's really easy to let the ego take over and think that because I'm the parent, you need to respect me, and you're the child and you can't disobey or disrespect me. Whereas I think the child should still have a voice, and the parents should be able to allow the child to resist them, because that's how they learn about consent. And in this world right now, where there is a lot of shift in gender ideology, transitioning of kids, the things that are happening in the schools, everything in the world, and the whole theme is really evolving around children. I think it's very important as parents to stand up to protect our child, because it's not just our child, but our future generations. And then lastly, it's all about, I'm talking, I guess, wellness, overall wellness, and learning how to be self-sufficient so that you're not relying on the system. Growing your own food, taking care of yourself so that you're not dependent on medications, exercise, movement, and finding products that are healthier and safer for you. Because what I've also realized that a lot of these products that I use, especially, growing up and as a young adult, are no longer as safe as I thought. So it's just really eye-opening. And a lot of these companies that I used to support, like basic laundry detergent or soaps, they've also fallen to some of the ideology that's happening right now in terms of supporting that there are more than two genders and that men can have babies and periods, which just blows my mind. So I think that pretty much sums up
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to I want to kind of like address all of what you said, really, because there's so much there and it's so important. Like going back to where you started and what kind of drew my attention to you with regards to the sharing of your family story. What kind of resonated with me on that is I had made a few years prior to that a decision to step away from the family unit, simply because there was just a level of not being seen or being heard that was happening. There was a lot of kind of psychological and emotional manipulation, and because and as bizarre as it might sound, usually when I'm in a public setting or with a group of people, I'm not necessarily the loudest person in the room. To be honest, I tend to be the quietest, which seems really odd because I'm someone who's been a performer and then has a podcast, so I'm using my voice. But in social settings, not so much. And because that was always my personality growing up, then a lot of assumptions were made about who I was as a person because I was so quiet. And I allowed, and I'll take some culpability there, I allowed a version of a narrative about me to be spread throughout. And then every time I tried to kind of speak up and speak towards, no, I'm not that, getting shut down and all of these kind of things. And then, of course, I've just always been like the black sheep of the family. I never kind of did the normal things. I always went the opposite way to the way that you should do. So that also posed a problem, as it would do, but when coming away from the family and just living a different life made me see the world in a different way. But also when you're out of a situation that is dysfunctional and toxic and you kind of travel around and meet other people and see the way that other things are done, nothing is necessarily perfect, but you see where things are just really out of whack, and then when you kind of keep going back in because you feel this pull and this responsibility because it's your family, so you should always go into that, but you keep going back into that situation, and then you come away and you need like a good few weeks or months to actually just get your own equilibrium back up. And you don't really, it takes a long time. It took me 40 odd years to like actually go, hang on a minute, why does it always take me so long to recover? That's not natural. That when you come away from a situation, then you feel so depleted because you've been in defense mode or fright mode. And when I kind of look back on situations, I was like, I would go into a situation where I deliberately clamped down because I was in like flight mode or fright mode a lot of the time, or freeze mode. So I go super quiet. And another thing that I remember myself doing when I would go and visit family was I'd binge eat all the way there. So I was almost like medicating myself. Like, I'd like everything, if I was taking the train, I'd be buying like the most sandwiches, the most chocolate, things that I don't necessarily eat to that extent generally. And I always thought, oh, it's just a journey thing. But then when I'd kind of really started to like watch my own behavior, it was like, well, what happens when I eat loads of carbs and I eat loads of sugar? I kind of go into a bit of a coma. I disassociate, and I could see that I was medicating myself against the environment that I was in. And then there came a point where it just got so bad. And I just thought, if I don't step away from this, then I'm always going to be beholden to that. And even if I don't even if I don't make the decision, if I've not made the decision kind of outwardly, there's going to be part of me that's still kind of playing that role, even though I'm away from there. I've not made the decision in my head to cut the tie. And I didn't make a big announcement about it. I knew the time when I walked away, I'm like, this might be it for this lifetime. And it's a hard thing to do because there's a lot of shoulds, and society always tells you what you should be doing when it comes to family. But there's a lot of healing there's a lot of healing that needs to be done. There's this train of this chain of just unhealed trauma that then, as you say, just gets passed on from generation to generation to generation, because people are not dealing with their stuff as time goes on, and the parents pass on their trauma and their dysfunctional behavior to their children, or also have inappropriate attachments to their children. And I'm not talking about like physical or sexual abuse. I'm talking about emotional attachments, or putting on way too much pressure on a children to take on a role that they shouldn't be doing as a child. And then that will create that child to kind of behave and become a certain type of adult, and it perpetuates itself on. It's interesting that we see that it's kind of reflected both ways. We see it happening in the family units where there's this kind of oppressive, abusive parental situation, and this acceptance of that in the child because they have to adhere to the parents. But in the same way, it's reflected out in society, where the majority of people who have not matured emotionally or spiritually, either within their family or just in the wider world, then have that same kind of attachment to government and pharmaceutical and media and celebrities. So the abuse continues in the family, but also is totally reflected out in society. And we've, especially over the last 2 years, we've seen it, that people will just come out and totally lie to your face. But because, they've got a white coat on, or let's say they're a PhD, or they're sitting behind a desk on a shiny screen and they're telling you their version of events, everyone's lapping it up, because why would they lie to you? But it's like, why wouldn't they lie to you? And we can see now the fallout of people believing those lies. But I think there's that reflection that what happens in the home is reflected out in society. I mean, what have you been seeing?
Well, here's an example. So my parents always wanted my brother and I to choose a career path that would be considered prestigious. So it would either be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. And maybe that's why they pushed me in the direction of architecture. And I probably wasn't fully 100% on board with architecture, but I went on that path because my parents encouraged it. Then my brother went on the engineering path. And he was so focused on getting a PhD so that somebody can call him doctor, not because he's a medical doctor, but the title had some sort of prestige associated with it. And so when he went on to go work, he had to work for really high name companies that are Fortune 500 or whatever, those type of companies. And so when 2020 hits, both him and his wife and my parents, they all got the shot. I did not. I was the only one in that whole family that didn't get it. And I think maybe that's part of the reason why there was some sort of rift, because my family and I chose not to. It all goes back to then following what's happening in the world right now and following along and saying, if the news says it, that means it must be true. Whereas I don't think I've ever turned on the news in I don't know how long. So.
And the thing about it as well, and it's, not just solely your brother, but anyone who has really played along with the way that you're supposed to do things and got all the kind of the medals and the financial rewards that's then given them, the status, like, the status that they feel with themselves, but also people look from the outside looking in and be like, oh my God, he's a PhD, he works at this massive company, must be really important. He's probably got a really nice house and good cars and stuff like that. So as far as society is concerned, on their own way, that he's winning, but he will know, whether consciously or unconsciously, that he's played a game in order to gain those things. So it would be very difficult for him or anyone who's kind of trodden that path to then go, well, it's lies, because you've built your entire life, your ego, your status, everything is embedded in the system because you've played the system and the system has rewarded you really well. So it's going to be really hard for someone to be like, why would they're not going to come on. They're doctors, you know what it's like if you've spent 10 years studying in order to get your qualification so that you can call yourself somebody and an expert, and then people will look up to you or look to you for the answers. You don't want to even consider the idea that you spent 10 years and like tens of thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars to get that education. You can't just brush it away. It's like hard for people to really pull away from that. The majority of society, because they're so externally led, then they never really take time or have time. There's a lot of people who just kept so busy that they just don't have time. They work 50, 60 hours a week, and then they come home and they just want to eat and watch television, go to bed and get up and do the next thing. You don't have any space. You don't have time to like sit down and ponder whether what you're doing and have been doing for the vast majority of your life is actually the way that things are. You've got no space to look outside of those things. You don't have the opportunity to even think a separate thought. And especially if you're watching the media all the time, it's not just the news that keeps you in the straight and narrow narrative. It's all of the drama and the advertising, and anything that comes through that screen is going to be layered with a lot of ways of maintaining what you believe is possible and what you believe is true, especially with this whole, pandemic thing. It's like you're watching the TV and they're telling you that this terrible pandemic's happening. You look out and you're like, but I didn't see it. Like, as I understand pandemics to be, I think they probably changed the definition by now, because, I don't have a TV, so it's hard because I didn't like sit there in front of like a 50-inch screen that was pumping HD images of like circular viruses and like the clock of death. So I didn't have that kind of going into my brain every day. I was getting up and, I was on lockdown. So I was getting up and just kind of doing my own thing and just trying to find different ways of living my life, but observing so much of like the effect that this was having, but I wasn't watching it so much. But it was interesting to then try and have conversations with people. The way that they would talk back to you sounded very plausible, but ultimately just didn't make any sense. And I think that's where a lot of people are struggling, because they can't, they treated their family badly, they've cut people off, all of the things that are done in the name of that. And now when we're seeing what the results of that are, that's again creating another divide of people who some can hold their hands up and go, okay, I was played, but the vast majority, they can't, can they?
But I think that also goes back to not being able to take responsibility or accountability for your own actions. Not having the time to just sit and think and do your own research. That starts from like when you're a child. If a parent doesn't teach you how to sit with your own boredom and to be bored and to sit with your own thoughts, they try to keep you busy, whether it's putting you in sports or all these so many activities, or right now in society, putting you in front of an iPad or, a phone or screen. It doesn't allow the child to just sit with boredom. When you can't sit with boredom, you always have to have your mind occupied with something that's an external source, in this case, in a device. Then you're going to then be drawn into whatever they're trying to present you with. And it's hard to take a step back and, take the lenses off or take the blinders off to be able to see the whole picture, from looking from the outside in.
What are you seeing with your own children, and then like the peers and then the parents of your children's peers, in terms of what's happening and how they're deciding to parent through this?
Yes. So my older daughter started school right before 2020. So it was March 2020 when all this started, and she was in a Montessori style school.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're familiar with Montessori school, everything is very hands-on. There's no screens, whereas in our local public school system, kindergartners go home with a Chromebook, which blows my mind that that's happening. So we decided we didn't want to go that route. So she enjoys this environment. She thrives in this environment because she works differently from like most kids. And I don't think she would even really survive in a public school setting, simply because she needs to be able to be free range of having to be able to choose how she wants to learn. And it's been very thriving. So their school switched to e-learning from March 2020 for the rest of the school year, and she was devastated. It's really hard on a child who's 4 years old to understand what was happening. She struggled and shut down. And so when you see that happening as a parent, your child was so excited to go start school for the very first time, and then be on a Zoom meeting 5 days a week and not wanting to be a part of it because, what is this? You're used to seeing your peers and your teachers in person, having, to socially interact with them, but then you're looking at a screen and like, what is this? I remember she would just run and hide when it was time to start the meeting. And I don't blame her. I mean, just not the way kids are meant to learn. And so they went back to in-person learning the following school year, but then, it was masks. At least as a preschooler, she only had to wear it in the hallways, but she was able to not wear it in the classroom. But then the year after that, it was like kindergarten, she had to wear it in the entire time, to the point where my husband and I finally said, when the narrative started crumbling, we contacted the school and said, hey, we need to address masks. Because what was happening was she was getting tired all the time. She was having bigger meltdowns and bigger tantrums because it just affects her breathing quality and having that. And she even told us, like, I don't want to wear this anymore. Like I'm having a hard time in school. So we sent a letter to the school administrator, and they kept saying, well, we're consulting with based on CDC guidelines. And my husband came back with the research, like, well, they said they were consulting with doctors. And he said, well, give me the proof. What are they saying? And the administrators just kept regurgitating what was being said. And so finally, I think a week after we sent those emails and kept hounding the school, they finally said masks are now optional.
Right.
But then my daughter would come home, and once the vaccines rolled out for 5-year-olds, she came home and said that, her friends were getting the shot, and it's saying, you need to get the shot too. And I said, well, what did you say to them? And she said, I'm not getting it. Her friends were basically pressuring her or saying, why aren't you getting it? Or, she said, no, I'm not getting it. But she would come home every day and say, mommy, my friends are getting it. And then she would ask questions about it, and we would try to explain to her the best we can. But, she understands it, but it's hard for when you're 5 years old to try to navigate that.
That is just crazy, because it's thinking about knowing that kind of the antagonism that was going on between adults about, getting the shot, being a vaxxer and anti-vaxxer, but the fact that a 5-year-old is dealing with that. It didn't even just drop into my mind that a 5-year-old would have to have that kind of conversation with their own peers. And lucky for you, once she's really strong-minded enough to stand up for herself, but that they weren't kind of just forcing, overriding your permissions and doing them anyway. Because I've heard that happened in many places where they overrode the parents' decisions and kind of just went, let the kid make their own
seen
mind
those stories. Yeah. And we make sure we're very much involved. We have ongoing conversations with their teachers, to make sure that lines are not being crossed. There's no school nurse or any of that. So, and my husband and I, or especially, my husband in particular, they don't even bother starting anything anymore with him because he's made such a big stink over the last year or so.
Good. And it's good to hear as well, because so many people just like rolled over, in the like, I mean, it's hard for me to kind of speak that way without people going, well, you haven't got children. I'm like, no, but I would like to think that if all this went down, I wouldn't just sit and watch it, because there's a number of things. One, for the health and the safety and the protection of your own child, but children grow up, and they may not be able to necessarily put into words what's happening, but when they're older and they can reflect on situations and really formulate what went on in terms of like when they've had the history of time and when they can bring the whole story together, they'll remember whether their parents stood up for them or not. That is just a hammer that's waiting to fall on many people's heads, that they don't realize that their children will know whether they stood up for them or not. And I think what we've got to expect in maybe 10, 15, 20 years time, when the generation shifts and those generations are now in positions of, well, who knows what the structure of society will be by then. But when they're cognizant enough to kind of reflect on the way that the adults dealt with what was going on, we're going to have a lot to answer for, with the metaverse and with AI and all of these screens and everyone kind of really getting sucked into this virtual world, because they say that history is always written by the victors. If that is the way that things go, then a version of events that will be told won't necessarily be the truth, that we're looking at. But having said that, if 20 years down the line, the children who are 5 to 10 years old now suddenly realize that society got played on in that way, where will there be that respect, that respect for your elders? As you grow up, you just realize that adults are human, your parents are human, and then you start to buck against them and challenge them. And sometimes it can hurt, especially when that little kid suddenly sees all the flaws that you have and then goes, actually, but you just did that because they said it on the television. You did that because your favorite singer said, you'd be asking those questions, because I ask these questions now, and it'd be interesting to see how that gets addressed. To kind of keep it on children, is what's being forced upon children with regards to this gender identity situation and this madness, but also how many parents are just coming up with stuff where they're like, yeah, my 4-year-old or 5-year-old now identifies as, the opposite gender, or some random cat. It's like, I had a lot of opinions when I was younger, but none of the opinions that I had at a young age would be the same opinions that I'd want to take on at this point in time. I probably don't even eat the same food, so
Right.
to be making such like monumental decisions. And then the adult in your environment, your caretaker, your guide in the world, is just going, well, yeah, if that's the way that you feel, like, let's go and do that, as opposed to protecting you and going, no, you're 4 years old, you don't know what you're talking about.
But that goes back to boundaries, right? So if a parent does not set healthy and safe boundaries for their child, then the child doesn't know about consent. Imagine if we as children would say, I identify as a cat, and the parents like, okay, you can be a cat. But back then that would have been considered ridiculous, right? I mean, and the stuff that is happening right now would have been considered ridiculous when I was a child.
Right.
But now this issue that I'm seeing is about the current generation of parents not learning about boundaries from their parents. And this is where we go back to trying to end this generational cycle, because they were not taught healthy and safe boundaries. They themselves do not understand how to teach their children healthy and safe boundaries. And so what we're seeing right now with parents pushing or encouraging their kids to identify as the opposite gender is because they haven't healed themselves. So they're passing on these wounds to their children, because they become people pleasers as a result of wanting to please their parents. That's what really happened to me. Like, I couldn't express any emotions as a child. And if I did, I would be punished, whether it be physically or verbally. And so I shut down and I stuffed all my feelings down inside. And I became a people pleaser because I didn't want my parents to get mad. And so I didn't allow myself to stand up for myself, because for fear of them how they would react, and so then become a people pleaser. And if I didn't see this and continued, I would have been, if my daughter the other day said, I want to be a dog. She actually said that to me. And I said, look, you can't say that now, because if you say that in school, they're going to take that literally. And that's a whole, and she's like, what do you mean? Like,
yeah.
But she's super smart, smarter than most kids her age. And she has a photographic memory. She's just very like, I think she's truly an old soul, because she sees things that many children don't see. And I think when I was showing her some of the stuff that's been happening right now, actually I showed her a video where this person showed pictures of these girls at the senior year of high school, and their picture in senior year of high school, they're, normal, and by what I would consider normal. And then, long hair, like nothing was altered. And then come back from college after the first year, hair is all cut, blue dye. And I was showing this to my daughter, my 7-year-old, and she's like, I'm like, does this seem normal to you? She's like, no. I'm like, would you want to do this? She's like, no. And I said, I kind of explained, I didn't know it was probably more advanced for her than she really should know about, but I had to have this conversation with her, unfortunately, to try to, because she's having issues in her current classroom right now, because she's in a classroom with first, second, and third graders, and she's feeling a lot of societal pressures of, wanting to be liked by everyone. So I'm trying to explain to her that, you're used to always being liked, and there are going to be some people as you grow up and that may not like you for a certain reason. And then for her, it's just because she's academically performing much higher than even the third graders. So she's reading at third grade level and she's a first grader. She's feeling a lot of like pushback and people like doing things to her negatively simply because of their own insecurities. But so I showed her these pictures and I said, would this be something that you would consider doing? She's like, well, no, mommy, like I don't. And then I further explained to her that some of these women would then eventually change gender, and to the point where they can't have babies anymore or can't nurse their babies if they were to even try to have babies. She's like, but why would you? She said, why would you want to do that? Because I want to have my own babies. I mean, she said it like from the heart. So, for her, traditionally, that's what she sees as like a healthy family unit. And looking at these pictures, she's like, she couldn't understand. But if you don't have parents that teach these values, of course, you're going to see a lot of this other stuff that's been happening. It goes back to boundaries. I had somebody say something to me yesterday I shared a reel about this trans woman who was talking about starting a Patreon account. This trans woman wanted to have kids meet with him in this secret Patreon community and said the parents screwed up. And so I'm your safe space now. I shared this and I had a couple people say, how can you be so hateful? Just because they're trans, it doesn't mean that they're a groomer or a pedophile. And I said, well, I wouldn't trust my child with this person. I was told that, I followed you because you said you broke family ties because you were hurt, but why are you hurting other people? And I said, I'm not hurting other people. This has nothing to do with hurting other people. I'm just stating what's really happening with the kids. This is predatory behavior. It's not, there's no good intentions behind it.
And I think with a lot of parents, and again, this is observation. So is many parents, people who are my generation, my age, so like in their like late 40s, early 50s, who have children, who are of kind of late teen and early 20s ages. Many of them that have children that are suffering a lot of this kind of anxiety and depression and things that just feel that kind of like condition that seems to be talked about in a way that's way off the scale. to when I was a child 30 odd years ago. It's like, partly, part of me had been like, well, if only I had the luxury of being able to kind of bask in my anxiety. Didn't have time for that. I had to get on with things were going on, but also noticing from, when you're talking about boundaries, like the lack of boundaries that they've experienced from their parents, is the fact that their parents just don't want to grow old or mature. So their parents are locked in this perpetual childhood, or trying to maintain semblances of youth. So because the generation before us, or the two generations before us, just did such a bad job of getting older. And, so for us, getting older just looks so painful. It looks like you're just falling off the end of the world. Everything's going to fall to bits. And then, society looks at you as a burden and all of these kind of things. So you've got in the back of your mind, even if you're not cognizantly making decisions on that, it's you're oh, I'm getting older, what am I going to do? You're trying to keep it all together. And at least we know much more about health and the way that our environments and the things that we ingest, as well as, like you said, the things that we use on our body, affects the way that we age and our health. So we've got that knowledge, so we know that we can maintain a better level of health. Also, if we look after our bodies on a daily basis in terms of just moving around and, breathing, exercising, having better thoughts, even, that will also help the way that we age as well. So we can age in a different way. But then, like, some people have taken it to the extreme in that they just don't want to get old. So they've not matured. And they're kind of putting out to their children, who are now going into early adulthood, that getting older is terrible. And they don't, and again, with the boundary thing, they don't want to be there. They're not able to, or they don't want to be their children's parents.
You bring up an interesting point about not wanting to get old. So my parents, especially my mom in particular, she was always so focused on her body, always focused on like wrinkles, and she would buy all these creams, and like she would look at her body, like her weight, and it always made me feel self-conscious about my own weight growing up. But then also, to take it to another level, my brother never really grew up because my mom he was always perpetually like an adolescent. And I think it's very culturally that when I went back to go visit my family in Hong Kong back in like the late 90s, early 2000, the way their voices were, it always sounded very childlike. There's one cousin that was still living at home with her parents and never got married, and she's only a few years younger than me. And the children are always meant to just take care of the parents, and like they never allow them to really grow up. And so my brother, I never really understood this until my husband pointed out, because he's not Asian. He's what my parents would call like a whitey, or he saw it from his own lens, saying that my brother, why it took him 10 years to finish his PhD, because he wanted to be in school to be the forever student, because he really didn't want to grow up and go into the working world. So he got into the working world, very late, and he's going to be 48 this year, and hasn't really bought a house. He has a child, another child coming, and he still hasn't, like when he would come home to visit, he would sleep in until 1:00 in the afternoon, and my mom would let him. Like he was like the golden child. She let him just because she wanted to still have her baby. And so I think when they really haven't fully grown up, then it creates another problem. But then going back to what you're saying about our generation, or actually our parents' generation, not wanting to grow up or wanting to get old, and the whole thought process of like when you get older, and I hear this from a lot of my clients that I worked with that are older, like, well, I'm old, so I'm not going to move as well. Like they accept that fact, instead of saying, hey, just because you're in your 50s doesn't mean you're going to be have creaky joints and not good mobility, because we can always change. We can always make a decision to, I'm going to walk more, or I'm going to lift some weights, or I'm going to eat better, and not rely on packaged food, and my husband and I took it to, one step further. Where we wanted to know where our food came from, directly from the farmers, and supporting restaurants where the restaurants were sourcing from farmers. So we always had some sort of direct connection to our food, because if we're relying on the system, because the system is designed to make us dependent on them, but to be dependent in a sick way. So they create a problem, they give you the solution. So, but, and this is probably going through another rabbit hole that many may not understand, but, the sugar industry was paid to blame it all on eggs and like meat, and like saying sugar is good, and we're in actuality it's like the opposite. And so you rely, sugar's good, so I'm going to load up on sugar, I'm going to load up on things that are going to make me sick. And you go to the doctor, like, why am I sick? Well, take this medicine. Well, this medicine's not working, we'll give you another medicine. And then you're tied to a slave to the pharmaceutical industry for decades and decades. And I think that goes back to this whole gender transitioning, where puberty blockers, and if you transition, you're going to be dependent on those hormones, and it's all by design because it's a highly profitable industry.
It's the wicked pipeline. Like, if you get caught in it, and I saw it in my own family, and I'm the one that I'd sooner just writhe in agony on the floor than even swallow an aspirin or anything like that, because I just recognize that I don't want anything of that, and I'm not, by no means pure. I'm not buying my food from farmers markets that much. I still go to supermarkets, and I've not really kind of set that up, but I'm aware of my dependency on these structures and how fragile we are at because we're dependent, that we go somewhere. I mean, we only have to kind of look back 2 or 3 years and look at the panic that went through, especially in this country. I don't know if it happened over in the States, when they decided that there wasn't any toilet paper.
Right. Yes.
And how crazy people went. And to be honest, I just think they just decided that they weren't going to put any toilet paper in the stores for whatever length of time, to create this scarcity and the panic around it. Because even if you don't want to think, of conspiracies, then think of things in a practical, systematic matter. It's like, how long does it take to make toilet papers? Like, how long does it take to create these things? What is the line of distribution for it to get to all of these places? Like, is it just easy to just not bring them to the shop for a while and get everyone spinning around? And then when you decide that it's all good, you bring it back in again. Because as I remember, like, a lot of things shut down during the pandemic. So it doesn't make sense that for a long time you don't have any toilet paper, and then when everyone's on lockdown, suddenly we get a load back on the shelves again. Like little things like that just don't add up. And the thing is, anything that's a lie will just start to shake in the face of just common sense questions. It's not even that you have to know what the answer is and know what's really going on. Like, the first port of call is that doesn't stand up to a common sense question. And like, a lot of the time with these whole things is always about, well, how long would it take for them to deliver all of these masks to every shop, and how long would it take for all these shops to have these sticky things on the ground? Just think about the process of manufacture and distribution and the timeline of that. And if that's like, if you understand the timeline that it takes to make millions of those things and get them distributed all over a country, all over countries and continents, then you see that it doesn't just kind of turn itself around. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Did those plexiglass shields save lives? I mean, or the dots on the floor? I don't know.
No, like, I always say I wish I'd taken more pictures. I really do, because no one will believe me.
I've seen some pictures shared where, like, I've seen some of the craziest things of people wearing on their heads just to go to the grocery store. Going to the fact of talking about toilet paper now is eggs, right? So eggs is the new toilet paper.
Yeah.
My husband, when this whole egg thing started, we used to get, if we weren't getting eggs from our poultry farmer, we would get organic brown eggs from Costco. Well, when this whole thing started, there was no more brown eggs, organic brown eggs, like completely out. And we got them at a good price. It was like $5 for like a dozen and a half brown eggs. And that was our go-to. And we knew that we could always rely on that. And also it was like completely out. And my husband's like, just you watch, in a while, Costco's going to bring them back and they're going to $5 eggs are going to go to like $8 or whatever it may be. And then during the pandemic, hand sanitizer, right? Everybody's like trying to find hand sanitizer. And this company that I support now, when they manufacture all their own products in the US. And during the middle of 2020, when hand sanitizer was completely out, they always had supply of hand sanitizer. They never ran out. And to the point where they ran out of bottles, they had to pull bottles from elsewhere just so they can get hand sanitizer to their customers. And so they showed that it was doable and there was something that the system was rigging just to create this sense of like panic or fear. It goes back to the parenting too, like fear. If you create this fear, it puts everybody in this fight or flight. So that's why when I talk to my kids and when they get scared about something, and I will ask them like, well, is this a true emergency? Do you need to really get all worked up about it? Because think about it, if you're a pilot on a plane and you're flying this plane and there really truly is an emergency, how helpful is it to say, get on the intercom saying, oh my gosh, we're going to crash, and you're going to put everybody in panic, instead saying, I'm just going to fly through this. Like language matters, and the media using certain language, they know that fear sells. All the different news channels, it's the same script. It's like if you play it next to each other, they're all saying the same exact thing.
Yeah, I think they all got the same email in the morning and print off the same PDF. When you're captured mentally by that external thing, because you don't have time to kind of sit and think and go, oh, does that make sense? Or, just ask yourself a question. And especially as well, when people don't have boundaries around their own ideas, so they've just got this total enmeshing of thought. You don't have the capacity or the confidence to actually just sit back and go, that's not what I think, and then be around people, whether in the family or whether in society, and people just turning and listening and just hearing a different point of view. But because everyone was so pranged on fear, they just went off at the trigger end. And that's when we saw all this kind of headbutting. And I had someone that I hadn't seen for 30 odd years come at me on Facebook. Like, come on, we've not seen each other since I was 16, and we like signed each other's school shirts. But somehow when I put that, they just kind of found their way up out of the darkness.
There's this meme of Danny DeVito, like where his head just pops up through like the couch, saying like, it's one of those, and that face of him doing that is just like, my friends just coming out of the woodwork when I post something, like to comment when I've never heard you, you've never talked to me in how many years, and you're just going to come out and just like state your opinion.
I mean, isn't it crazy how brave the internet makes people, tapping away behind their screen? I mean, like, and obviously you've had your fair share of like online hate. Have you managed it, and how do you choose to respond to the troll side of things? Because obviously with what you're doing is reaching out and really touching people in that they can see that someone else is going through the same thing, so that gives them some comfort, and you can work with them if they want like further help. But then there are the others that just get hateful and triggered and will come at you in your comments. You probably get a load of DMs as well.
I've been getting a lot of those, especially from my video about cutting ties with family, and a lot of people are just coming out and saying, hey, or they're just not even commenting about it. They're obviously triggered by it, and they'll say things like, why don't you go get a hair makeover or something? It's just something that to find something to like nitpick about,
right?
And I mean, somebody called me this, I think I said to this other day, called me this C word for cutting ties, and said my dad should have shot me, like, and ended it, instead of like, and then I'm like, And I take a step back because previously I would have been really offended by it because I haven't really healed until recently. I actually did a session with somebody who specializes in, she calls it rapid transformation therapy, where it's a little bit of hypnosis, where she access your subconscious mind. And when you go through a lot of childhood trauma, and I realized why I had very few childhood memories. I can't even remember. Like my husband asked me, like, "Oh, do you remember I was 4 years old when this and this happened?" I said, "Well, actually, I don't really remember any of it. I only have like two specific memories that always comes up in my dreams a lot, and two of them are bad memories. One was where my dad punished me physically for telling my first lie, and he actually brought that up decades later after I got married, saying I lied to him. Like, I'm a child. Like, first of all, when a child lies, it's because they're fearful of what the parent would do if they told the truth." And then the other instance, a childhood memory I had, was when I got hit by a car. I was 12 years old, and it's because I was with a friend and we were supposed to go be somewhere. I told my parents I was going here, but my friend said, "I want to treat you to some ice cream." So I'm like, "Oh, ice cream." And so I fall with her, but I knew that my parents wouldn't allow that. I did it behind their back, and I got hit by a car as we were crossing after we got the ice cream. And these two memories came up in this session that I had for this rapid transformation therapy. And the person I was working with that was doing it, she asked me to how I felt with these memories, like what was I thinking? And the two memories specifically had a theme that I felt that I wasn't allowed to speak the truth because the truth didn't align with how what my parents would approve of. And it made me feel that I wasn't worthy. And in this memory of the car accident, she asked me what were my feelings. And I said, well, I think, because I asked, why was my life spared? Because I should have actually died because I got thrown across the hood of the car. Like I blacked out and I walked away with like a 3-inch linear skull fracture. And in actuality, I probably shouldn't have lived. But then she asked me, like, well, why do you think you did? I said, because I was meant to be on this earth for my kids. So when you're a child and you go through all this trauma, your inner child, tells these stories and you think that you're not worthy. So during the session, she asked me to look at both of my parents in the face and to just say, I forgive you, but not in the sense of I forgive them for what they did, but I forgive you so that I can come to be at peace. Since coming away from that session, when people make these kind of comments on my posts, and I have to just take a step back and pause and say, perhaps they haven't really healed yet. And you have to we get so focused on like feeling the emotion, and that emotion that I'm feeling when somebody comes at me with a hateful comment takes me back to my childhood because I felt that I wasn't worthy of my parents. So I take it personally, but it's not really about me. It's about them and what they're feeling. And I have to kind of give them some grace because they probably went through or are still going through what I went through. And so I just say, hey, maybe you're triggered by what I'm saying, but we can still agree to disagree, because whatever happens to just having disagreements. And I think we're in this world right now where everybody feels they're offended and they can't just disagree. And they always have to feel like everybody has to agree with them. No, I mean, we all come from different places with different thought processes. And I actually had a lot of people follow me from my reel about cutting ties. And some of them were actually more on the left or more liberal. And one person say, hey, while I consider myself a liberal, I actually appreciate your point of view on some of these things that I may not necessarily thought I would have agreed with before. So I think people need to have more of an open mind instead of coming, it's easy to be the keyboard warrior behind this, behind the screen and just make those kind of comments because they don't have to take accountability for it. They don't have to, they just throw it at you because it makes them feel better. And it relieves them of, something but they still haven't really like done the work to do the healing.
all of us walking around with all our triggers and our wounds, if we take the time or if we recognize that something is causing a recurring situation or a recurring reaction, and have that self-reflection and then take responsibility enough to try and do something about it so that we don't go and leak all over other people. But for the most part, again, like you say, there's still so many people that are just operating from their wounds and will go to the grave, unfortunately, with that wounding. That's kind of created the society that we have, people pleasing on such a massive level that you want to be seen a certain way by all of your peers and then all of your work colleagues, but then all of society or all the people that follow you on social media and like the filters and whatever you're using to present this version of yourself that doesn't exist, this mask that, you know, that everyone's wearing. One of the things that I'm personally really studying now is true shadow work as well, and really getting into the crux of the areas of ourselves that we've suppressed. And, you know, there's a kind of like love and light new agey version of it going on there, but there's a deeper psychological exploration that in our instances where we're growing up and we find that there are elements of our personality that get us into trouble or get people to react to us harshly. And when you're in the family situation, you want to survive, you want to fit in. So you realize the best way to kind of survive is just then to kind of play nice and pretend that those other bits that trigger everyone don't exist. So you kind of push that side down and then go out into the world as a version of yourself that isn't really true, because it's part of yourself that's hiding, and it still always keeps coming up. You know, will it come out in different ways unless we really look at that part of ourselves, and that part of ourselves can be a positive side, that part of ourselves can be, you know, a negative side as well. But there's part of ourselves that we're not being congruent with and not being authentic with. And I think because so much of us are walking around with presenting an inauthentic fake version of ourselves all the time, then we're getting fed the ideals of this is what it means to be successful, this is what it means to be good looking, this is what it means to be clever, that everyone's kind of then squeezing themselves even more into these narrow tubes of what reality or what good and successful and right is, that they're pushing all of those individual aspects of themselves away and just turning into this kind of glob of people, which is why I think there's so much pain going on. It's for us to start to find out what it is that's not allowing us to evolve and move forward and what we're afraid of.
And I saw this, you know, as from a postpartum perspective. So, you know, as a new mom, if you think about it, when you're pregnant, you have so many prenatal visits because you're like, oh, we got to make sure baby's okay. And like, and you look at the mom postpartum, like they spend so much time worrying about the baby, but then postpartum, you get one postpartum visit and that's it, right? There's no take care of mom, you've taken care of baby, but you're not taking care of the vessel that carried the baby, because pregnancy is like creates this biggest injury or scar because the placenta leaves such a size diameter of like a plate in your uterus. And yet a mom only gets like a postpartum visit at 6 weeks and they're said, you're good to go. You're approved for exercise, but the doctor has no idea what she's approving the patient for or the mom for. No physical therapy, pelvic floor physical therapy, or any of that. And then the mom goes off on their own, trying to figure it all out. And then she's on social media while in the middle of the night, feeding baby on her phone, and then just getting depressed because like, oh, how are these other celebrities getting their pre-baby body back? Why aren't we celebrating the body that created this baby? You can't go back, because if you go back to pre-baby body that never grew a baby, why aren't we going forward? It's creating this like very unrealistic view of postpartum, which I think, you know, I struggle with a lot of moms when I meet them for the first time. And then I ask all the questions like, do you get enough sleep? What type of birth did you have? Like any complications? Like, do you have any tearing or things like that? And their most concern is like, can you get rid of like this? And can you get rid of like my stomach? I'm like, but that stomach's stretched for this baby. And like, and I think it's just, we forget about the mom. Yeah. And we put the mom on such high expectations to like shrink back to when she didn't have the baby. It's very unrealistic. And you know, as you mentioned, you know, the Instagram or social media, we see this very like artificial view of what a mom or person's life is through this lens, when they don't see behind the scenes that, kids are yelling and screaming and having this huge meltdown, and while the mom is trying to get it together. And I think, as a mom that was never told how to regulate her own emotions as a child, or even a parent, then you have a child that's screaming, having a meltdown, and then they expect them to just be quiet, and because the parents just can't handle those big emotions. And so they just punish them for having emotions when you're supposed to teach the child how to regulate their emotions. Mm-hmm. Whining and having a temper tantrum is a form of communication, but they think so they punish them for that, right? Which makes no sense to me. Like you're expecting a child to be a miniature adult when you're supposed to teach them how to regulate, so that when they're adult, they can actually regulate their own emotions, which is what we're seeing is not happening right now.
To speak to the whole snapback culture, one of the things that just needs to be more considered and spoken about when it comes to this kind of celebrity snapback that goes on is that, put it as a question, maybe many of those celebrities don't actually carry their children. Many of them will openly admit that they have surrogates, but maybe more of them are having surrogates than you would know. We can like take we can go like further down the rabbit hole, but we'll keep it here, right? You know where my mind was going. Yes. So let's just keep it there, like kind of keep it at base one, and just go. If you think of these like kind of world famous celebrities who are brands, basically, are brands like Pepsi Cola, where they are generating like millions and millions of dollars just because they're out there and they are putting out their music or their films or their products or whatever. So that brand, that item needs to be kept in tip-top condition of all times. And then when, they're going to create this narrative around that person is pregnant and then has a baby, we don't know when, that's the thing. It's like, we never really know, because we are not in the labor room seeing this person either have a baby taken from them or pushing the baby out. We don't see, we just make an assumption because we get told a story. And I think one of the parts that we need to be more aware of and more awake to is the fact that when a lot of these celebrities are online or on film, on camera of any description, even when they're having a candid moment in a coffee shop, it's all scripted because they're a brand. Nothing goes, nothing seeps out of the cracks accidentally, even if it's meant to be like a negative story. So in order to maintain like a snapback, it could possibly be possible that person was never pregnant at all. And it's very easy to create the illusion of a pregnancy over a state of time, which is why if you've never been pregnant, then when you remove the illusion, you are snapped back because your body never went there in the first place. Yeah. So I think that, that's something that maybe more people need to consider, that we're looking at an illusion. It's all about entertainment in all aspects of like whenever they appear, because I think the one I saw on and I don't buy magazines at all, but I saw it the other day on Chrissy Teigen. Oh my God, she's got her, she had a baby 3 weeks ago and she's walking around in a crop top. I get it. Like if you've just like carried a baby, and like, again, I'm speaking like from hypothetical position. If you just had a baby and like during your pregnancy, you gained X amount of pounds, and then you're at home and you're having to deal with it. You don't have a myriad of nannies or anything like that. And you're dealing with the reality of adjusting to a new child and the sleep deprivation and the fact that you're not able to do your hair all the way that you like still kind of getting in that. And then you're just like, when you get a spare moment, you're just kind of doing like a kind of scroll on Instagram, because where else are you going to go, what else are you going to do? And then to rub it in your face, it's like she's walking around in a crop top and you've still, your swelling's not gone down. It's like, you're not going to feel good about yourself. These people don't guide us in a way that makes us feel good about ourselves. Anytime you enter into comparison and you're looking at her with her flat stomach, and then you're going, well, why is mine not flat? Because maybe, possibly, what we saw and what we got told was not necessarily as true as we believe it. I think we've grown up in society, we just kind of take the first port of information. The way that we get schooled is you go in and someone gives you a book and they write something and they tell you that that's fact, and you go, yes. And you kind of then take it and assimilate it into your reality, and you never develop that, is it though? You never have that questioning, because that questioning is beaten out of you, and you're told that you're disruptive and you're troublesome should you ever have a question and then dare to even voice that question. But I think now the time we have to be like, well, it just seems amazing that all of these celebrities can drop babies and then be in their skinny jeans like 2 or 3 weeks later. It's like, have they got some magic pill in Hollywood? Understanding the truth behind that would relieve a lot of stress and anxiety of women who are just thinking that they're not good enough. You've just given birth to a child. Like, is there anything better that a woman can do? Stop comparing yourself to these brands.
I would have more respect for these celebrities if they actually talked about, hey, I'm going to my pelvic floor physical therapy appointments. I am going to, working on learning how to breathe again, because everything shifted during pregnancy. And so my ribs are shifted or expanded. And so my breathing patterns were different during pregnancy to accommodate this growing baby. And so once the baby is born, I'm still holding on to those same breathing patterns as if I were still pregnant, or still moving, or still in positions as if I was still carrying this baby. And so it creates this dysfunctional breathing patterns. When new moms meet with me and they say, okay, I'm ready to, I got the all clear from my doctor, I'm ready to exercise again. And I said, hey, hold up. And so I said, I had them lay down, and I said, okay, let's breathe. And they look at me funny, like, what do you mean? Like, aren't we going to exercise and get my work on abs and like all this? And I said, no, like, I want to see how you breathe. And then I do a diastasis check, the separation of the ab muscles to see, how much of a gap there is. And that also affects their breathing too. And then I ask them to breathe, and they're like, oh, this breathing's easy. Well, then I get them down there, and then like, oh, this is hard. Like, I'm like, okay, now you got to connect it with your pelvic floor, because you have to retrain everything basically from baseline.
Right.
And you start over again. And then the first 4 to 6 weeks is basically building your foundation back before you can actually go back to the activities you wanted to get to that you were working on before you got pregnant. And they're like, why does this take so long? But I'm like, now you have to do these exercises using the breathing techniques I had you relearn all over again. And they're like, oh, it's just hard.
Right.
And I'm like, yes, it is hard. And usually you won't get back to doing things until, if you're breastfeeding, hormones won't shift back until at least, 18 months or more. And they look at me like I have 2 heads on, but I'm like, we need to do this work, because if you don't heal right, you're going to come back and see me and say, everything's hurting because you chose to like go back to whatever it is, like CrossFit or even Peloton or any of those things that high intensity exercise, because they're in this panic to like get their pre-baby body back. So they do all this high intensity exercise. I had one woman tell me that she couldn't produce any milk because she was doing like high intensity exercise that just depleted her milk supply. They don't think about these things, right? Because they're so focused on like shrinking instead of just, healing.
It's interesting that you say that about the Peloton. I remember years back when I used to go to the gym, there was a woman that was pregnant and she had her baby. It was over the kind of New Year's, Christmas period. If you walked past her in the back, you wouldn't know that she was pregnant at the front, because she just kind of kept it together. She was back in the gym like days later. She was like quite trim and quite small, but she could lift heavy. And at the time, it was like, oh, amazing, you're a superwoman. That was where the mindset was.
Right.
She just dropped a baby like 2 days later and now she's there hard at it. Whereas you're just thinking like, maybe that wasn't such a thing to celebrate. It's like, stay at home with your baby, like just, you don't worry about it, because it's not like she put on that much weight, because she'd worked so hard all the way through the pregnancy anyway. So there wasn't really that much for her to kind of like work on to kind of pull herself back. She probably would have naturally kind of gone back to herself as well. The pressure for women to just kind of like batter themselves into submission. Again, it's that whole thing about not being a child anymore, and society keeping us in this perpetual mindset of being young and fit and youthful. And even though we all want to be healthy and strong, but then also embrace the fact that we've been alive a certain amount of time, and allow that wisdom to show in the way that we show up in the world, instead of being, this kid all the time as well.
Going back to that, yeah, I mean, in like a lot of those people that go like hard pretty quickly, early postpartum, they're the ones that statistically I've seen have issues like, well, I'm leaking when I jump or when I sneeze or when I cough, because they don't understand like the pressure system of the pelvic floor. And so they go back in hard, but they don't have the knowledge. And I see this happen a lot with women that have had babies and they work with male trainers, because the male trainers don't really understand. Know of this well-known male fitness influencer who worked with a couple women that I know who actually got pelvic organ prolapse from working with him doing like barbell deadlifts, because he didn't understand the pressure of when you're lifting heavy. And think of our pelvic floor as a canister. So like a can of pop or a tube of toothpaste. So you have the top part, which is like right at our diaphragm, and then the bottom part, which is the pelvic floor. So if you're wearing like weight belts and things like that to support you because something doesn't feel right, well, if you're squeezing like a pop can or tube of toothpaste from the middle, all those insides, where is it going to go? I mean, I'm having conversations with my older daughter who like, oh, I'm going to hold in going to the bathroom, going to pee. And then I'm like, please don't do that, because you're going to have problems later. I wish I had this knowledge, like before my first child, but now that I have it, I'm teaching it to other women and my daughters, so that, my mom never taught me about, she was a nurse, but she refused to teach me about my menstrual cycle or anything like that. Cause she's like, I don't want you getting pregnant. Well, I got pregnant in college. It almost makes me wonder, like, why are some of these women having a baby? What is the reason? You go back to the gym to hit it hard, and then you go straight to work, back to work after your maternity leave, and then the baby goes straight to daycare. Society puts this pressure on, and it's all by design for the women to go back to work, and then they don't connect with their child. So, they come home, I need my mommy time. I'm going to have some wine, watch my Netflix, and then put my child to bed and sleep train my child so they can go to bed. And they wonder why they don't have a relationship with their children. Look at the halftime show. I don't want to get too much into detail about it, but even somebody I know in the pregnant postpartum pelvic health community was saying, why is everybody bashing her performance? She's pregnant. She was up there and performing while she's pregnant. And that's so great that she can still have her career and have a baby. But it's just, I don't know. I
20, 30 years ago, I don't know if she was ever famous in the States, but Nana Cherry was like a singer rapper in the UK.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And when she came out, she was probably like 8-9 months pregnant. And it was such a scandal, amazing and like unusual thing to see a young mum, a mum to be kind of up there and being sassy. And it's interesting how things become more or less scandalous depending on the way that our minds are being directed. We could talk forever. Before we go, I mean, have you got anything that you'd just like to close off and just speak about the work that you're doing as well, so that people can reach out to you?
Like I said, I work with pregnant and postpartum women, and as well as other clients that want to move better. But my focus is really on pelvic floor health and the importance of it, and that women and men have pelvic floors. And I think this is something that should be really recognized. When I work with some men, I talk about that and they look at me kind of funny. I'm like, well, we all have a pelvic floor. It's just parts are a little bit different. I really like talking about movements and how to help people move better, and trying to find ways, especially with parents and moms, to incorporate movement throughout the day, that just because you're getting older doesn't mark you to not being able to move better, or you have the stigma that I'm going to just grow old with creaky joints. But then going back to as a parent, and I think being a parent has been really eye-opening for me to talk about teaching a child about boundaries, safe boundaries, and consent, especially in the world that we're living in today, to teach a child to be able to stand up for themselves, to have a voice, to be able to be seen and to be heard, and to be able to advocate for themselves, because, parents need to really see them for who they really are, and try to remember how they were as a child. Like if they just wanted a red cup instead of a blue cup, like that's what's important to them. Parents seem to forget that, their world right now is just still here and it's still growing. And we expect them to be here to have this big understanding.
Right.
And I think that if parents can see a child through their eyes, it would be such a much different relationship. And then lastly, just wellness. So everything from movement to what you eat, what you put inside your bodies, but what you're putting on your bodies. So being very mindful of the products that you use. Most people don't think about products that have like hormone disruptors. A lot of the stuff that our skin is showing can, be a sign for our body to like look inside deeper. I talk about like lymphatic system and how to really do lymphatic drainage and things that will help heal the body naturally. And then using products that not only are cleaner and greener for you, but also supporting agendas that are more aligned with our family. So Patriot owned, American made, that doesn't support any of these other, ideas that we're seeing today. If you think about it, even like the green companies that are supposedly green are not really green. And so trying to find a company that's truly American made is very rare these days. And most people think that American made is just blasphemy, but that's another.
Where's the best place for people to find you?
I think right now it is on Instagram. And so my Instagram handle is movement.wellness.mama. And I do a lot of my stories and share stories, and I share tips about my views about the world, about parenting, about helping women and just empowering women.
Thank you so much for
Thank you. I love this conversation.
It's perfect. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for a great conversation. We honestly could have gone on for so much longer. And thank you for listening. You can find out more about me on my website, carolmaywhittick.com, carolmaywhittick.com. I'm on Instagram as Casmic, CAZMICK, Facebook, Carol May Whittick, and Telegram group, Her Conversations and Inspirations. Also, if anyone doesn't know, I do have a sister podcast to Her Conversations, Higher Energetic Resonance Inspirations, where each week I look at a different aspect of spiritual and mindfulness growth, you could call it, and just share a practice to help us delve deeper. This is a time where I'm sensing that we all want to delve deeper and know more about who we are and be able to live a more expanded and awakened life. Whatever platform you're listening on, search for Her Inspirations. Thank you for listening. Speak again soon.